All right, welcome. In this video, we're going to have a quick look at adding some shadows, highlights, and a little bit of color to our flatting project. And let's have a quick look at our workspace here. I do have a few extra things open on here that maybe I shouldn't. I'm going to go to Window Workspace, and you can see I'm just on the essentials for here. So as usual, I'm going to recommend you maximize your work area here as far as your images and minimize all your presets here. If you don't need it, turn it off. So I'm going to jump straight to Window. I do want color on. I do want layers, but I do not need learn. If you've got learn or libraries or properties or anything that you don't need, minimize that, and also try and squash them into the corner here. Let's have a look at my layers panel. I have line art. That's our line over the top. Flat layer, which is a big block of color, and I've also created, particularly for this image, a visor copy. So the visor I can pretty much have as a quick selection. So when I come to painting in the visor, I can have it as a transparency and adjust that separately, so I can build the face and everything else that I need to do from there. So you will notice that I have locked all of these. So I've finished with them, so I've locked them so I don't accidentally start painting them. This is crucial. If you don't lock them, you will find you'll accidentally select on the wrong one, and it'll kind of mess you up from there. So I'm just going to create an empty layer above that because now it's locked. I can't actually paint on it. And I think in one of my previous videos, I did kind of mention as we start doing this, we want to have a think about where our light source is located, where that main light is going to hit on our objects. Is there going to be any shadows cast by certain parts of this based on that light source, and also how the colors are going to affect and reflected light and that sort of thing. So it's a nice thing to keep in mind. And I'm going to show you how to manually start painting some of this stuff in. So at this moment, the flat layer is okay. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this color. And there it is there. Now, there's multiple ways of approaching this. You could jump into your color options here and go to something like Hue Cube or Brightness Cube. Not going to give as much. RGB sliders, HSB sliders. It's up to you. I'm going to stick with Hue Cube here. You can actually get your full spectrum here. You can go brightness and darkness from there. Other options to go into your swatches, and here are your swatches here. I'm just going to try and maximize this a little bit. Please note you can build your own swatches for this. And we can, view these in different sizes, and these are just going to be, a nice little way for us to sort of, just keep it down to specific colors and stuff like that. So I do have a technique for being able to get original photos and stuff like that and take them in, but for this part, I'm just going to sort of, eyeball it. I'm going to keep it relatively monochromatic for a lot of the part. But this is entirely up to you how you want to get this. There's a lot of color theory with this approach. So to do any selections, as usual, I'm going to jump onto my flats layer. I'm going to go to select my wand tool. The shortcut for this is W. It's over here on the toolbar. Make sure you're on the wand tool, not the quick selection tool. Remember, Shift and the shortcut, in this case W, will allow you to cycle through if there are multiple tools under one roof. Let's have a quick look at our options here. Tolerance I've got set to 0 because in our flat layer we should have that done correctly, which means it's to the edge of a single color. If your tolerance is low, we should be able to select a color and we'll only select that color. If your tolerance is too high, and let's see if we can do that, you can see it's bled in and started selecting this orange layer because it's fairly close. And the higher your number, as far as the tolerance, the more it's going to try and select multiple things. As you can see now, it's just gone all the way through here. So anti-alias turned off. Let's get tolerance back to down to 0. Anti-alias is turned off because I do not want to get that blurred effect. I want to go pixel to pixel. continuous, that's up to you. To give you an idea of how continuous works, let's zoom in a little bit. If I select on this green area, with continuous turn on, it will only select that part there, regardless of this extra green bit over here, because there is a border around that. If I untick continuous and then reselect new, you'll notice it's selected this green. So it's selecting anything of that same color value. So if you want to select everything that's the same color throughout the entire image, great. If you want to just keep it to one area, do that. Also remember, if you press Shift, a little plus sign will come up and you can start selecting multiple areas. Alt will subtract if required as well. And remember, Command or Control D will deselect everything. So nice little shortcuts to remember there. Sample layers, please make sure that that is turned off. We only want to select from our flats layer. If you have sample layers turned on, you are going to have your line work interfering with that, and then you're going to end up with all sorts of dramas, because your line work is going to have a slight blur on it, which means that your flats layers and your coloring is not going to be great. Great, so let's turn that on off and let's get to coloring. So I'm going to run through and start selecting areas, and I'm probably just going to sort of keep down to maybe some a lot of browny areas and stuff like that. So now I'm going to select on my color. I'm going to select the color I want for that, and I'm going to drop that in. Wand tool, select on the next area. G for paint bucket again, so select the color I want. Make sure we jump onto that, otherwise you're going to get a thing yelling at you, like I just did. And I'm going to drop that in again. Wand, flats, select the color you want. G, make sure you select back onto color. And continue. So I'm going to select both of those, color, drop it on there. Now I have developed a technique using paths, which allows us a different technique. Up to you whether or not you want to follow that. I do have another video, and essentially what we do is we convert our flats layer into paths, which means that we can have that off to the side, and rather than jumping forward to the flats, you use the paths layer as a selection tool instead. But as I said, up to you whether you want to jump in and do that. It is a little bit of extra work, but it can actually pay off, particularly if you're going to be doing lots of variations. Don't forget, your color picker is a great technique if you want to select the same color again. So, for example, I'm selected up here. I want the same color as down here, so I'm going to go to my paint bucket. I'm going to hold down Alt, bring up my color picker, and as you can see, I can slide through and select that same color right there. Back into my flats layer, wand, color, hold down, and you can, because of the variations you can do, if you don't like a color, you can always change it a bit later. All right, we're almost done. As you can see, it's a pretty quick technique once you get the hang of it. Wand, G, color. Probably going to just add, do what a kind of off blue for this, or green, just to get it to pop a little bit. And let's do the inside of the visor here. Let's do that blue as well. Now, you'll notice at this point, I'm not really worrying too much about the shadows at all. It's just getting basic colors in. And let's jump back to our flats. As you see, a lot of just back and forth. Like so. Missed the yellow there, that's all right. All right, that'll do for now. So there's my color layer. If you're happy with that, great. Other things you can do is you can also go to Image, Adjust, and you can do things like change up the hue and saturation. You can have a play around with that, and you might get a different result that you kind of like. It's always worth experimenting with. It's just going to pop over the main colors. I'm not minding a little bit of green there. That's kind of good. You can change the saturation down around as well. But remember, this is affecting just this layer. So you'll notice the layers, areas that I haven't colored in, it hasn't really made much of a difference to at all. But that's fine for me at the moment. Now what I'm going to do is start focusing in on adding some shadows to this. So once again, I'm going to create another layer. Let's call this shadows. And I'm going to use the flats layer once again. That's why I've changed the color here. And I'm going to jump in and I'm going to start thinking about areas where I'm going to add my shadows. Now, in order to add the shadows, I'm going to make sure that I'm using a Wacom tablet for this. It really does help you out a lot. And I'm going to use a brush, and up here at the top, I'm going to go to my brush settings, and this has been changed over the years. I'm just going to use a very basic brush for this. I'm going to go to General Brushes, and the very first two brushes, so the first of the first folder, soft brush, hard brush, you'll notice there's other options here, soft, round pressure size, etc., etc. And this is basically, if you've got a Wacom drawing tablet, the pressure is going to be able to be set as a default for these things. And brushes that are already built in with this, but I'm going to show you how to change these up really quickly. There's a bunch of other special effects brushes. I'm going to keep it down to the basics. I'm going to go soft round pressure, and this is going to give me a soft shading technique. So we'll look at the defaults quickly. Opacity is currently set to 100%, which is great, but if you're finding that it's too assertive, please feel free to drop this down. I'll quite often use a lower opacity and build it up gradually, rather than just going 100% and really getting the full wrath of the color there. So you can drop that down either by clicking on there, dragging it down. You can click on opacity and left drag, right drag, or you can use the numbers on your keypad. So if I press 5, for example, that's going to give me 50%. 2 is going to give me 20%. If you really want to be precise, you can go 3, 5, give you 35%. 0 will take you back to 100. So keyboard shortcuts are great for this. Flow is going to give us a different technique. I won't get into that right now, but this is basically, especially if you've got effects and stuff, it's really going to play with that. Smoothing is an interesting one. I'm going to leave that for now. Essentially what it does is it helps to keep lines a little bit more curved. For that, it can cause quite a bit of lag, particularly if you've got it up really high. So let's leave that down to 0 for now, and let's just trust on our drawing skills to get this done. So with all that in mind, you'll also notice there's a couple of little button icons here. The first one is pressure for opacity, which means the harder I press down on my pen, the darker or the more opaque or more ink or paint that's going to be coming through. So if I push really hard, turn that on, and this is again is using our Wacom tablet. If I press really hard, I'm going to get a nice dark line, whereas on the other side, if I press really soft, I'm going to get a very soft line as well. So depending on how hard I press is how I'm going to get that. If I go right to the end here, you'll notice that this one here, if we hover over that, that is going to have pen pressure for size. So the harder I press, the larger my brush, the lighter I press, the softer. And you can use this in conjunction with the opacity for pressure, in which case you get, if you press really hard, you're going to get dark and wide, or if you go really soft, it's going to be quite narrow and small. So you can choose one or the other, or both in this case. There is an airbrush feature as well, which is a airbrush style build-up effect. Have a play around with that and see if that does much for you, but I'm going to leave that off for now. Now, there is something I really do need to address right now. I'm going to zoom in to give you that straight away. So we have a look at this area that I've painted, and you see it kind of looks like a caterpillar effect. And what that is strangely enough, get the brush so big so we can maybe see it. you'll definitely start noticing if you do have this. This is in our brush settings. We can click in there. Great thing with Photoshop is you can really customize your brushes. You can build your own brushes, all that kind of thing. But to try and get this caterpillar effect where it's going light to dark, this is actually, it can be kind of tricky to find. It's in these brush settings here, and it specifically is in the top one. And the reason why I say it's hard to find is all of these other options have tick boxes attached to them, whereas brush tip shape does not. And if you're not into reading every detail in your pop-up, it's hard to find because it looks like a title. So brush tip shapes, and what you want to do is you want to get this spacing down and get that down to 1%. So 1% is going to be, as you can see from the preview here, it's going to be very smooth. As you ramp this up, you're going to get more and more dots, more and more spacing between your lines. So get that down to 1% as a default, and you're going to get a lot better results once you're shading. So I'm going to delete all those. Let's just get a big rectangle tool. So nice little experiment there, but let's actually get onto the shading. Now, as far as shadows go, I've got my brush selected. It's a soft brush. I've got my pressure set to opacity for pressure, so lighter and darker. There it is there. And smoothing set to 0. And let's see what we got here. I've got a feeling that I've actually turned something off on this. No. All right, that's fine. And use my flats layer. I'm going to go 1, and I'm going to select areas that I'm going to use. So make sure I select on my flats layer 1. Deselect it. I just had something selected. I'm going to Command D deselect, and I'm going to select on, let's just say, this helmet area here. Actually, I'm going to focusing on the shadows. I'm just going to grab some of the areas that can darken up first. Jump onto my shadows. B for brush. I've got black selected in this case, and I'm just going to manually start painting in some of the areas that I think are going to have shadows. So I'm just going to grab a couple of areas here. The face is going to be in shadow from this. This area here is going to be in shadow from the helmet, and potentially this area here as well. And also, let's grab this under part here. And I'm just going to jump into my shadows and just manually start brushing in. It's a bit quite aggressive as I'm painting, so I'm just going to lower the opacity down of my brush. So I'm just going to brush in more gradually than normal for that. Like so. Cool. Now, if you really want to start getting finicky with this, and I suggest that you do multiple shadow layers for things, because in this that I've created some shadows here, I may wish to go through and change the opacity of this, and then maybe go through create another layer where I'm going to add even more shadows, so I can really get that variance. And if I don't like any of them, I can go through and change them. While that's selected, you may also wish to do some highlights. Downside for this is really start building up layers quite quickly, but I'm going to show you anyway and create a new layer while that's selected, and let's call it highlights. I'm also going to right click and start giving these colors as well, just so I can identify. So my shadows are there, my highlights are yellow, my shadows are going to be purple. So jump onto highlights, brush, and I'm going to switch this over to white, like so. By the way, if you have your two primary and secondary colors down here, X will allow you to switch from forwards and backwards. And again, with a nice soft brush, we can see we can start adding in some nice highlights to that, like so. Jump back onto my flats layer. Let's grab the helmet potentially, and let's grab a couple of the shoulder pads as well. Jump back onto my shadow layer, brush, black, and start figuring out where I'm going to add my shadows to that accordingly. Look, we can really get into a lot of detail on doing this. I'm going to kind of stop that continuing there. It's very addictive after a while to try and get your image looking good. But multiple highlights, multiple shadows. So the other thing I really do want to address, I'm actually going to delete those because I can. And I do want to address another technique for adding shadows and highlights. And this is actually adding color to your shadows and your highlights. So quite often what will happen is you will just use, as a default, people use black and white for shadows and highlights, but it can be quite important to start thinking about the color of your shadows and highlights. So I'll give you a quick example. So I'm going to create a new layer. Let's grab, I'm actually just going to jump on my flat layer. I'm going to grab my wand and I'm just going to grab a whole lot of areas on this helmet and also padding and stuff like that. That's pretty good there, I think. And new layer. Once again, I'm just going to right click on that. Violet is going to be my shadow colors. And I'm going to go B for brush. And rather than painting in with black, I'm actually going to select, essentially what you want to do is you want to select an opposite color on your color wheel for this. So these are kind of tan and orange. They're falling into sort of the red group as far as colors go, if you look at the color wheel. So I'm actually going to go opposites of this. I'm kind of going to go maybe, maybe a bluish color as an opposite for this. So let's, I'm jumping in RGB sliders. So if we kind of pick out, holding down Alt, bring up my color picker here. And let's go with something a little bit different. I'm just going to switch back to Hue to sort of jump around. So using Alt to select my color here, it's actually going to pick up my color here. You see this is kind of an orangey color. So as far as an opposite for that, we're probably going to go sort of a bluey color as an opposite for that. So I'm going to go B for brush, and I'm going to start drawing in my shadows. Now, we can go really dark with this to start with, and go, okay, well, I'm going to get a really dark shadow for this. But the real technique that helps with this is changing your blend modes. Now, blend modes are going to depend on the color and also the values for the light to dark of the layers below. But I'm going to change this to multiply, and it'll actually add, it'll actually kind of enhance your image a little bit. It's kind of hard to see, but it's a really subtle sort of thing. And if I change up the colors even more, it starts adding darkened areas, particularly. It starts adding some nice color to that. So if we keep that with the blue, like I suggested, we are going to get a nice little complement to our orangey colors right there. Particularly works if we go for like the skin colors here. I'm going to go B for brush, make sure I'm going to create a new layer for that. Select the color of this guy's skin here, and if we have a look at that, that's kind of in our oranges again. So I'm going to go sort of a bluey color for that and start painting that in. Change my blend mode to multiply, and let's get a little bit darker on that, and even darker and less saturated. And we can start adding some nice colors to that. In addition, I'll create a new layer from there. I'm going to once again get the skin color here, and I'm actually going to ramp up the brightness of this. I'm still going to have a little bit of color for this, and you can also play around with the color here. And I'm going to use this for adding the highlights. So I'm brushing this in as opposed to just using white and black. It does have a little bit of color, And once again, I do recommend trying to change out some of the blend modes. Something like overlay or soft light can work quite well, but you may actually find some other stuff working anyway from lighten and linear light and some stuff like that might work, but typically I find overlay works quite well for this. Jump back to my shadows. Let's go back to my blues, and I can start pushing this backwards and forwards. And in a pretty short amount of time, you can get some really nice effects popping for that. So that's pretty good. Deselect that. Flat flare. I'm just going to focus on this helmet area here, and I'm just going to start selecting these areas here again, just to prove a point. And I'm going to add essentially a rim light to this. So I'm going to create another layer for this. You should be trying to focus a little bit on renaming this, or giving them a color so you can identify. And once again, I'm going to go with my selection done, new layer. I'm going to go with again an opposite color, but I'm going to ramp it up as far as the saturation goes and start pushing it more to sort of a really, really blue light, sort of teal light, as opposed to the orange color, which is the basis of these colors here. And I'm going to go B for brush, and I'm just going to start hitting the edges of this. I'm going to get a nice big brush and just sort of scooch it around the edge. And this is going to start pushing that reflected light that I might get. And don't forget to adjust your brush size as you go for that. And then I'm going to go even further and just go really, really bright with this. And just get that even further, just popping on the edges there. And contrasts on the shadows are great for that. And while I got that selected, I may wish to sort of jump back into my shadow layers and start really pushing that kind of stuff. So highlights, you typically want to stick with the same color range. Shadows, surprisingly enough, is heading opposite on the color spectrum to really really get your images to pop. Because it's going to contrast the actual color by having the shadows in the opposite from there. All right, that's going to be it for this video tutorial. Quite a bit thrown in there, and don't forget to rename your stuff so you can keep track of it. And we'll see you on the next one.